Alrighty, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and get started, since it's now the starting time. All right. So, first of all, welcome to my talk. My name is Meaghan Brown. I'm currently a psychology or clinical psychology doctoral student at the University of South Florida. And I work with Edelyn Verona both in life as my advisor and also on this project. And so, our project is titled From Guns to Intimate Partner Violence: The Impact of Power and Control. And so this project is actually a continuation of my thesis, my master's thesis project, which is currently going under data analysis. And so we'll present a little bit kind of on that information as a pilot, while also giving you some background information about the study we intend to do thanks to the GVRC. And so we're in this symposium in this entire event because we understand that firearm violence is a significant public health concern, particularly in the US. And while the US is not necessarily unique in its rate of gun ownership, right, there are other countries that mirror our ownership, which, depending on the place that you are in or the region within the United States you're in, can vary from about 22% to upwards of 40%. There are other countries that mirror that rate of ownership. However, the US is particularly unique in its problem with gun violence. And so, another unique part of US gun culture is also this use of guns as a protective factor, right? So people often purchase guns for the reason of self-protection, which is actually a pretty unique phenomenon to the US. While there are other countries that also have that type of ownership, the US is unique in its kind of being one of the primary reasons for ownership, followed by hunting and recreation. And protective gun ownership is a particular concern for us because it's been associated not only with handgun ownership, which has its own ties to lethality of gun violence, but also people tending to own more guns and be more enthusiastic about gun rights. So, handgun owners and protective gun owners tend to be anti gun control, tend to own more guns, and tend to plan to purchase in the future further guns, especially when they feel like those rights are being infringed upon. So they're a group of gun owners that we're particularly interested in because of these reasons. And research has previously examined what may drive protective gun ownership in the US. Why does it exist here versus elsewhere? And the primary kind of mechanism that's been examined through psychology is, this idea of fear, and the need to control an environment based upon fear. And Strobe and colleagues in 2017 established this kind of link between fear and protective gun ownership. And they found that there really were two types of fear based protection. There was past victimization, right? So I've been a victim of a crime, and so therefore I'm concerned that I'll be a victim again. And so I purchase a gun in order to feel like I have power and control over the situation, and I may be able to protect myself from future harm, which I then, determine based off of my past victimization, I'm at an increased risk for. But the actual more salient type of gun ownership related to fear is this belief in a dangerous world, which is called the BDW. And it's this idea that the world is a large and dangerous place, it's uncontrolled, violence is out of check, and you're very likely to become a victim of violence. And so those people you could understand then buy a gun because they feel like I'm empowered, I can protect myself, and I'm able to control my environment should I ever be threatened. And we know that intimate partner violence is obviously also a major public health concern, but its link between gun ownership and IPV has largely been established. We know that having a gun in the home provides a unique type of threat for violence, whether that's unintentional. Unintentional, homicide or injury based off of mishandling a gun, whether it's suicide, and then also obviously the potential for firearm intentional violence, whether homicide or suicide. So we know that having a gun in general increases your risk for violence within the home. But then there have also been research that has shown that the mere presence of a gun, regardless of whether it's actually used in an act of violence, right? Just the idea that a gun is within the home and has the potential to threaten a victim can also exacerbate violence. So this is, the weapons effect, which is that a weapon being present increases aggression. And this has been found in homes that have both guns within the home and intimate partner violence occurring within the home. And our study mainly focuses on male perpetrators. We're only collecting male subjects for the reason that while IPV occurs across genders, genders across the spectrum can inflict acts of intimate partner violence. Male perpetrators tend to inflict more frequent and more severe types of violence. So the injuries associated with it and the severity of the acts tend to just be more severe when the perpetrator is a male. And they're also frequently using IPV as a way to induce fear and domination and control over their partner. And this piece, known as coercive control, kind of expands how we've previously looked at intimate partner violence in both the psych realm and then in kind of sociology as well, which is we want to move beyond just the count variables of how many times has this happened within the past year. While that can be useful information, it doesn't necessarily encapsulate all the different types of intimate partner violence a person can experience. And so coercive control is an important piece here, which is this kind of controlling behaviors that can also elicit great emotional distress. So a partner constantly checking in, asking where you are, tracking your location, not allowing you to leave a room, right? Blocking the doorway. While that's not necessarily an act of physical violence, it certainly is an act of control, and it's meant to kind of demean the other person and control their actions, right? So it can leave a person experiencing that feeling pretty powerless. And so coercive control has kind of been this new realm of looking at IPV because it is such a fundamental piece of IPV perpetration. And we can see how control and respect play a role in both IPV and protective gun ownership, right? You want to have a gun because you want to control your environment, right? Protect yourself from future harm. And then IPV control obviously comes into that, controlling the other partner, controlling their chaotic world. And so when we look at kind of control and power, both within IPV and gun ownership, we notice two real types of control and power that come into play. And I am using power and control kind of interchangeably because that reflects how the literature views it. But I just want to give a brief overview because we'll be using these statements or these definitions later on in the presentation. But power is our perceived ability to autonomously accomplish goals, control valuable resources, or to modify the behaviors of others via rewards or punishments. And perceived power is our belief in how much power we actually have. How much power do we have over our circumstances, over our environment, and over other people? And then desire for power is us wanting more power, right? We want to get more power over our environment, over others, in order to feel more powerful. So you can see how those two are linked, but definitely kind of different constructs. And men who commit acts of IPV often fall into two categories here. And this was found by Prince and Arias in 1994. And they fall kind of within two groups, those that are high on desire for power, below on perceived power, right? So they want power, but they don't feel like they have enough of it. And we can see how this would relate to IPV as well as gun ownership, right? I don't have enough power and I'm hungry for more. So I may act out on my partner in order to establish more power in a relationship to feel I have more control. And I might also purchase a gun for that reason, right? I feel more powerful when I own a gun, or at least I think I will feel more powerful when I own a gun. And so I purchase one or acquire it in some way in order to increase those feelings of power. And then those that are low on both perceived power and desire for power. And so, how this looks in intimate partner violence is that it typically falls within people who are acting out with less instances of IPV, right? This may just be a one off occurrence in which they kind of lose control completely and realize that, nothing is going the way I want it to, and I don't have the ability to even get more power. So I'm just going to act out in a way that may get me more power in some way. And so that's kind of how power has been viewed individually in people who perpetrate IPV. And so now we're kind of closing the gap, right? So we know that gun ownership established has been linked to intimate partner violence. Having a gun in the home increases your likelihood of IPV. It also increases the severity, but we don't know what the actual arrow is between those. And so while psychological mechanisms of gun ownership and its relation to IPV has been looked at, it's mainly fallen between looking at it through like a fear lens. And giving the overlapping themes of power and control in both IPV and protective gun ownership, our research program is aiming to examine whether protective gun ownership is specifically linked to IPV, right? So it's not just that gun ownership, yes, no, leads to IPV, right? It might be that not all gun owners are perpetrating IPV, or it's not even significantly linked just to gun ownership in general. It's more specifically linked to protective gun owners because of their, drive for power and their low perceived power and high drive for power. And so we're going to look at whether different types of power explain this established relationship. And so our previous kind of pilot data, the undergraduate sample, this is my thesis research. And while analyses are ongoing, we do have some preliminary results to share. So gun ownership in general was associated with more acts of IPV or coercive controlling behaviors. So we had a total sample of 450 undergraduate students, 130 of which were current or intended gun owners. And because of the low base rate of gun ownership in undergraduates, we opened it up to those that intended to purchase a firearm within the next 5 years, because we thought that the psychological mechanisms of those wanting to get a gun would be similar to those who potentially already have one, especially in a time-limited capacity, right? You plan to purchase within the next 5 years. So at some point upon graduation and likely leaving your undergraduate career, you intend to become a gun owner. And our results are interesting so far. So we found that gun owners were more likely to be somewhat older compared to non-owners. That was significant. And they were also more likely to be white and not be a racial minority, which fits our previous research that we found of newer gun owners tending to be white and more conservative. And they did not differ in terms of ethnicity or their year in school. And our preliminary results show that in general, like across the board, looking at this graph, that owners were perpetrating more coercive controlling behaviors against their partner. So just across the board, the gold bars are higher, but the significant findings were in the realm of derogation and control. So that's the checking of the phone, checking location, the constant kind of badgering of a person, trying to gain control from them. And then their total scores as well were significantly higher compared to non-owners. But the pilot study had some flaws. While it's a large study with 450 participants, it is an undergraduate convenience sample. And so with the funding from the GVRC, we're aiming to collect from community male gun owners. And so the drawbacks of using college students is that while they are at some of the highest risk for intimate partner violence, they also are younger in age, just typically. And so that presents less of a likelihood that they've necessarily even been engaged in a serious relationship. It also allows us to use only current gun owners. So we removed the future kind of gun ownership piece of this because we knew that we could actually collect Floridian gun owners who presently own a gun. And we also obviously thought that our IPV variables would likely be stronger because these may be people who are older, more in established relationships, and just kind of have more life experience. Um, and we also are intending to look at larger pieces of gun culture, which may not be present in our kind of college student sample, right? So, political and ideological correlates, as well as kind of other gun behavior. So, we know that guns are not allowed on college campuses. So, those kind of behaviors around storage and also carrying were pretty limited in undergraduates because it's just less feasible for them to engage in those type of behaviors while they are in college. And so the aims of our proposed study, aim one is to explore common patterns of gun ownership in Florida men. So this includes beliefs and attitudes towards gun, their demographic and political correlates, such as masculinity, extremism, belief in QAnon, things like that, their motives for gun use and carrying, and their methods of acquisition and storage as well. Aim two, to examine how gun ownership motives, such as self-protection, relate to IPV. Examine whether these relationships between gun ownership motives and IPV, how they're related to having and desiring more power, and then also looking at whether these relationships remain if fear is also accounted for. So kind of using those past psychological mechanisms to look at whether, above and beyond, does power actually account for the relationship between gun ownership and IPV, or is it still that kind of belief in a dangerous world as well as past victimization? So we're asking all of those questions of our self-report participants because we have the opportunity to. And so we're limited on time, so I'm gonna breeze right through this. So we're recruiting 300 male gun owners, aiming to look at protective versus non-protective gun ownership. So people who own for their primary reason, and it will be a forced choice, right? They can rank any number of reasons why they own a gun, but then we will ask them what their primary reason for owning a gun is. This is in the Tampa Bay area, which is ethnically and racially diverse, also a gun-rich area, also more open laws for gun carrying in terms of Florida statutes. So it's a really interesting place to examine gun ownership. And we're also planning to integrate open science principles. So we've been approved by the IRB to create a de-identified database that will be open access upon the completion of our study. And the hope is that this can help us share findings and increase collaboration across the fields. So Dr. Verona and I are coming from a psych perspective, but we're obviously very interested in looking at this from a criminology perspective, a public health perspective. We can see how all these fields kind of can meet as one to work on this in a collaborative way. So we wanted to be sure to leave ourselves the option to kind of make it open access and increase open science within this kind of subfield of gun ownership. And I have my stopwatch at 17 minutes. So these are the different measures that we're going to be using. I'm happy to share these slides with whomever would like them. And then our planned analyses. So I'm going to quit sharing my screen and return back to you all because I'm not able to see any questions. All right, we don't have time for questions. Thank you, Angela. So if you have any questions, I'll put my email in the chat and feel free to email me, ask me any questions. If you have thoughts on anything I presented, feel free to let me know. Alrighty, I'm gonna head out to the final talk in the main room. But again, feel free to send me any questions. Thank you all.